I suppose I must start by confessing that these videos are a lie. Okay, well, not a lie as such, but more carefully crafted truth. The thing is, they're not as spontaneous as they might appear. Even that slight pause before the spontaneous there, I thought about doing that. I planned to do that in that way. See, I don't have scripts for these videos, but I do think about them a lot and I do plan them in my head. And then I do several takes of every line so that I can make sure I get the right intonation, and also so that I can modify the line in order to make the point that I want to. I can add more context on multiple takes, hence why you see so many jump cuts in my videos. I actually do this a lot in real life as well. I pre-plan conversations in my head and have a kind of contingency of responses ready to go. Yes, I'm aware that that's some kind of autism sign. If we went through all the red flags I have for appearing on some sort of spectrum, we'd be here all day. But in what is, I guess now, the third part in my Defending Improv series, I want to talk about what I actually mean when I personally improv. Because as is abundantly clear, prep means different things to different people. And to me, it means having a vibe of how I think a scenario should go. When a combat starts, I have a vibe for how difficult I think it should be, how surprising I think it should be, and how significant I think it should be to the current situation. I don't have a layout of the map. Sometimes I do, but I don't necessarily have a layout of the location and all of the monster stats and all of the everything in place to try and create a balanced encounter. And to some degree that is prep, albeit just not a very mechanical one. And this prep requirement varies from game to game. Unfortunately, D&D still dominates the hobby, so we have to talk in those terms quite often. And D&D prep asks for a lot, and a lot of it, in my opinion, sort of pointless. So when it comes to pre-game prep, I've mentioned before that I enjoy players coming with extensive backstories, even pages long backstories. That's absolutely fine with me. It's a rich story that I can feed off of and build my world. And a lot of the games that I run inhabit that anyway. Fate, for example, as I've said before, is my favourite game, is all about creating backstory. It's all about the players writing backstory of the game and creating elements of the world in character creation. You literally can't create a character in Fate without writing their backstory. It's not optional, you have to do it. It's how you build your character's stats and features, or at least the versions of stats and features that they have in that game. Even to a lesser degree, Monster of the Week and Candela Obscura, which we ran on my Twitch channel, those also have elements of that. They have questionnaires that can be controlled by dice that ask the players to fill in details about their life or answer questions about how their character interacts with the world or how they are connected to other players. And most modules and even the kind of base template of how to build a scenario in D&D is devoid of character input. The characters aren't that important to the game. They're designed to be somewhat expendable. It's meant to be a dangerous game. Your character could die from a bad encounter or a few bad dice rolls, and then you just pop in a new one. Your characters are designed not to matter to the world of your game. But I think that people coming from the Game from Actual Play shows have got the opposite impression, that their characters are very important, that embodying their character is significant to the game, something that's just not mechanically supported by D&D in any way. So in terms of pre-game prep, I probably do actually a lot more than some people. I just have the players involved in it. I have the players building the world with me, and I do a lot of writing. I am a writer at the end of the day. I'm working on a novel. I've written little short films that look like this. I've done web series. I write a lot. But I don't want to take that into the game world and simply write something to railroad my players through. I want to be collaboratively building, and hence why I like the improvisational style, because I know that if they're throwing prompts at me and I'm building off of them, it's gonna be more organic and special and unique. Whereas if I simply wrote an adventure, I just end up railroading them through it to some degree, because I will have written something that I would become somewhat attached to, and I wouldn't have fun doing that anyway. I'd just be reading them a story at that point, and nobody wants that, really, do we? We can all agree that nobody really likes railroading. I think we can get hung up on what the definition of railroading is. For example, if you give your players choices, but some of the choices are correct and some of those are wrong, that's not really choice at all. You're just offering the players the option to fail. That's railroading with extra steps. So that's more railroaded than I personally think is acceptable, but people seem to defend it and accuse my way of being railroaded, so I don't get it. So I go into a game with a heavy chunk of information already in place, and importantly, information that the players are already aware of, either because they came up with it or they were there when we were building it as a collective. So I've already told them quite a lot about the world before the game begins, meaning that I spend much less time explaining things to them. At least that's the theory anyway. As a result, I would like to think that the players feel more immersed because they already know a fair bit about the world. They feel like they've lived in it. They feel like their characters have existed in it already, instead of being dropped in and having to have every little bit of minutiae explained, like their characters got amnesia and just woken up from a 7-year coma or something. With that overview, I will then compile a junk drawer of ideas, which I sort of always have. It's just one of the things of being a writer. There's a little piece of something, a little character somewhere, a little bit of dialogue, a little bit of story, a little bit of something rattling around somewhere. It's the junk drawer. I can then pick little pieces out of that and just throw them in and expand on them in the moment. But for me at least, that's sort of where prep stops. We have a very expansive baseline of information, but then I don't do much between sessions. I will go into a session knowing sort of what's going to happen, probably because we'll have discussed it at the end of the session, or at least gotten to the end of the previous session with an idea of where the players are going next, even if it's only vaguely, and even if they might well change their mind once we start the next time. And I can then have in mind the vibe of that next session, the vibe that we're going to get in, but I don't prepare anything per se. I don't think, well, these are the NPCs they're going to meet, these are the towns they're going to go to, these are the fights they're going to get into. I don't prepare really any of that. I'm happy to invent a town, invent a location, invent an NPC, invent a monster encounter on the fly. Just know that something is probably going to happen here, and that's the idea. Is I want this to be a relaxed session, I want this to be a dangerous session, I want this to be a story intensive session. I can have an idea of what I think the session should be, and then whatever the players do will happily fit into that, because I'm never trying to get them somewhere. I'm never trying to get them to a conclusion or to a set piece or to the next piece of the story. I am building it off of what they are going to do. Can I explain this a little better? I will have an idea of the importance of the session. It's going to be a session that leads to a fight, or like a session that leads to a big reveal, or a session where they meet some important NPC or something. I will have an idea that they will be doing something like that, but I won't have the specifics. I won't know what that fight is going to be. I won't know who that NPC is. I don't know what the reveal or the twist or whatever it is. I just know that I will want to include one. The players are then free to do whatever they want within the session, and I will figure out how to fit that in to what they do. So if they go in a completely the opposite direction that I thought they were going to do, they leave town and they go somewhere new, I will introduce that element that I wanted to introduce in that way. You might be thinking of this as the concept of the quantum troll. That's the idea that you want your players to fight a troll. Whatever they do, whatever direction they go in, whatever door they choose, there is a troll behind it and they're going to fight it. That's the quantum troll. You are railroading your players with the illusion of choice. And that's fair. That's a fair criticism of that way. But I am very loose with it. It's not a situation where I want them to meet a specific NPC. I might think that I want to meet a useful NPC. I want them to meet a new quest giver. I want them to meet someone who's going to lead them astray. I want to meet an NPC of some kind of style, and that is genuinely it. That's genuinely the end of the thought process. I don't know who that NPC is, what they're going to do, how they're going to be important. I just know that that's the vibe I want to give off. They then go the way they want to go, and the actions and the way they take will dictate how they meet that person, and indeed who or what that NPC is will be dictated by where they go, where they are, where they meet them, how they interact with them. And all of these ideas can be thrown out if it doesn't make sense anymore, if it simply doesn't make sense to what they're going to do. I've had a session in my Monday night games where I was like, this is definitely leading to a combat, even potentially leading to a dungeon crawl, even though I'm not necessarily very good at those. I was sure that that scenario was leading to a big confrontation. The players, however, kicked off some kind of fight and then scarpered. They fled the scene in the knowledge that the chaos they've caused was probably enough to complete their goal. I won't go into any details, but because it's quite complicated, they're level 19, the campaign is quite heavy, there's a lot of moving parts, but I was surprised that they opted to do that, and I immediately threw out all of my plans, all the vibe of the NPCs and the location they were going into, which they had opted not to even go into, and decided, okay, we're going in this direction now. We're going back the other way. Scrapped what I thought the vibe was going to be and built a new vibe for the next session. So whilst quantum trolling is railroading, I still think that the binary pass fail is still railroading as well. I just think it's, like I said, railroading with extra steps. If you'll give your players two options, but one is correct and one is wrong, well, you haven't really given them two options. And it's important for me to have that prepared vibe, because sometimes players just don't bring it. That's not on them. They're interacting and reacting to the world. That's the power of the game, their ability to react to the world in unique ways that, again, video games don't give them the chance to. So if there's a lull in player activity, I can start having events happen in a particular way that allows them to interact or at least observe what's going on and build the world that way. Because players shouldn't always have to bring it. Sometimes you're just not in the headspace that you want to think that much about it, and that's perfectly fine. The GM has kind of signed themselves up for not being able to be in that headspace, which is unfortunate, because then it means when you're not, you simply can't play the game at all. But it's fine. It's a trade-off. I think we all, at a certain point, we just know whether we fit the GM's chair or we don't. But without having specific plans, that vibe is enough for me to get us through the session. I really hope the vibe explanation makes sense. Let me know in the comments if it makes sense and if you have any questions about it. And the other thing about it is the logic. You've got to obey the logic of your world. Again, the baseline of D&D comes with a lot of this in place, so I understand why it's easier to join that game than it is to join an unfamiliar system or even an unfamiliar world. If you said, hey, let's play a Star Wars game, and a player had never seen Star Wars or even vaguely knew what it was, then yeah, that would be tricky for them. But the baseline of fantasy is easier to slip into, and there's an internalized logic to how the world works. So you have to be aware of and obey that logic. Now, I think that building the world with the players makes them, as I've said, more intrinsically familiar with the world and that logic. So I think that they have a deeper understanding of it than simply just being thrown into a world. But you as the GM have to have a firm grasp on that logic, and that logic won't always make sense to the players, but as long as they butt their heads up against it consistently and they see consistent consequences, consistent effects, consistent knock-on effects of their actions, then it will make sense and they will be able to build off of that. They will be able to understand the world in a way that they can then interact with it freely. Hopefully the mechanics inform the logic, which I would argue D&D doesn't do, though I've seen plenty of people argue that it does. I don't get it, I don't see it. But it is consistent, I suppose, in its own kind of broken way, and that's all the logic of your world needs to be. It needs to be consistent. So what I'm talking about is not doing prep in, I guess, a more D&D understanding way, not having the adventure laid out. So if your session just kind of laid there waiting for the players to walk onto it and interact in a specific way with outcomes determined. I think determined outcomes, predetermined outcomes, I don't know. I think that's, again, it's just not a great way to run games, I don't think. I think that you need that spontaneity of the element, and that could be too much for some people. Sure, that's fine. If you need that storybook structure, then great. And the more branching elements that you can include in that, the more interactive your world will feel. I just feel like that's a lot of effort. So prep in the sense of here's what's going to happen, or even a laundry list of things that could happen, just is slightly unnecessary, and also I find detrimental to my style of play, and that's not what I do. That's what when I say low no prep, I say I'm not doing that. I'm not trying to prepare something for the players to do. I'm not trying to give the players something for them to do or a way in which I think they can do it. I am giving a intention of how I think the session and the game should go, and if the players deviate from that, fine, I will pick up something new. But generally speaking, the vibe is loose enough that it will fit any scenario that the players want to interact with. I know that the game needs to be moving forward. We've had a couple of slow sessions maybe. I know it needs to move forward the session, so they need to meet someone who has important information this session. It doesn't matter where they meet them, but I know they need to do it because they're getting a little stuck in the weeds here. So, and it's things like that. I know how I think that the game needs to go. And in terms of combat, I know this is an important combat. It needs to be difficult. I will adjust it on the fly and build it as we go so that it is a difficult combat. If we're going to play a strategy game, I'd rather play Twilight Imperium. If we're going to play a story-led game, I'd rather play Mansions of Madness. You know, I've got a bunch of games that I can get a better, I enjoy more in that, you know, regard. And you know, role-playing games, I don't come here for that. I come here for the unlimited possibilities and the building of the story, because that's the fun part. That's the fun part of me as a writer and a generally creative person, and I want to be doing that in real time with the players. I hope that covered enough points so that what I was trying to say made sense. If I didn't, then do let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. If you want to support the channel, I have a Ko-fi support page. I have a Patreon as well, but we're still building that at the moment, but it does currently exist. But yeah, we're building next. We've got some more events and things coming up. Speaking of events, tickets for the next mega game that I wrote are out in North London on the 2nd of November. So those tickets are up now. We are doing a donations system. So it's up to 45 players. It's a big mega game, basically a big 45 player simultaneous role-playing board game event. If you don't know what a mega game is, Google mega games, shut them, sit down. I've got some good videos on them. My link tree with all my other socials and everything else is down there. Again, yeah, like and subscribe, please do that. It's all great for the algorithm, it's great for everything. I'd love to do more stuff like this, and I've been trying to keep up with September. But yeah, outside of that, I think that's all I've got for this video. I've really recorded for a very long time, partly because I left the camera running while I went to feed the cats and forgot to stop recording, but that's fun. So yeah, that's me for now, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. The end.